Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal exciting details for the week ahead from August 25th to 28th, 2025. First, Ava Jerome and Rick Lansing Davis were both entrenched in a dangerous game of manipulation, each unwilling to concede the upper hand. Their shared history of deception had only sharpened their instincts, and now their rivalry had reached a point where every move was calculated to either destabilize or destroy the other. For Ava, control was the ultimate goal, a way to secure her standing and shield her vulnerabilities, while Rick, driven by his own ambition and resentment, sought to dismantle Ava piece by piece. The tension between them was thick, and the anticipation of who would falter first added an unsettling energy that promised an inevitable explosion. The true danger lay not only in their scheming but also in the unpredictable aftermath of their actions. Whoever managed to outwit the other would not simply win a battle. They would unleash consequences that might spiral far beyond their personal feud. A misstep could expose alliances, unearth long-buried secrets, or drag innocent bystanders into the crossfire. Ava was known for her cunning adaptability, but Rick had the persistence and ruthless streak of a man who would stop at nothing. It was less a matter of who could strike first and more a question of who could survive the inevitable fallout. Meanwhile, Nina Reeves was quietly piecing together her own strategy after her tense encounter with Rick. That meeting had left her more aware than ever of the precarious position she occupied, and she understood that to move forward, she would need to act decisively. For Nina, plans were never merely about self-preservation, they were about rewriting the narratives others imposed on her life. She carried the weight of past mistakes, and each move she made was a bid to reclaim the fragments of her dignity and her place among those who had doubted her. With Rick lingering as a potential obstacle, Nina knew her next steps would have to be as bold as they were precise. Carly Spencer's latest confrontation with Nina added fuel to the fire, sharpening Nina's resolve rather than weakening it. Carly's barbs had always been designed to provoke, and this time they succeeded in igniting something within Nina that could no longer be contained. If Carly thought she had successfully undermined her rival, she underestimated Nina's ability to turn pain into motivation. What Carly may have seen as a moment of triumph could become the catalyst for Nina's redemptive rise, particularly in her determination to help Willow Tate reclaim her children. For Nina, this was not only about winning a personal battle, it was about proving that she still had the power to protect and to heal. Willow's journey was equally fraught with uncertainty as she awaited an important response. Having extended herself in asking for a significant favor, she now stood in the vulnerable space between hope and disappointment. Her plea was not made lightly, it came from a place of both desperation and conviction, shaped by the knowledge that her choices carried weight not only for herself but for her family. Whether her request had been directed toward Michael Corinthos or Harrison Chase, the waiting tested her resilience, forcing her to confront the fragile balance between her loyalty to the past and her need to build a stable future. The possibility of Michael being her confidant carried its own complexity. Their shared history had been turbulent, and asking for his help risked reopening wounds that neither of them fully healed from. Yet Michael's position and influence might make him the one person capable of shifting the circumstances in Willow's favor. On the other hand, if Chase was the one she sought, that would represent a different kind of trust. An acknowledgement of the enduring bond that lingered despite the paths they had taken apart. Either choice would shape not only the outcome of Willow's immediate concern but also the emotional ties that bound her to those around her. As Willow and Chase continued to find moments of reconnection, the fragile lines of loyalty in their lives began to blur. Chase, committed to his marriage with Brooke Lynn Quartermaine, struggled against the resurgence of feelings that had once defined his relationship with Willow. Their interactions carried a dangerous intimacy, not always intentional, but undeniable all the same. Each shared glance, each moment of unspoken understanding chipped away at the boundaries that Chase had promised to uphold in his marriage, leaving him torn between duty and desire. For Willow, these moments were both comforting and unsettling, reminding her of what once was and what could never fully be again. The potential strain on Chase's marriage loomed like a storm cloud, threatening to undo the stability he had worked so hard to build with Brooke Lynn. Though his love for his wife was genuine, the quiet pull toward Willow created fractures that Brooke Lynn might eventually sense. Trust, once compromised, was difficult to restore, and Chase risked undermining not only his own happiness but also the future he had promised. The reconnection with Willow, while tender and rooted in shared history, carried with it a dangerous weight, suggesting that their unresolved bond could ignite chaos not only in their lives but also in the fragile web of relationships surrounding them. Second, Brooke Lynn remained blissfully unaware of the fragile reconnection forming between Chase and Willow, her attention fixed on other pressing matters in her life. Though the subtle signs of intimacy were present in their shared glances and quiet conversations, Brooke Lynn had no reason to suspect that her husband's heart was being pulled in two directions. Her focus was instead pulled toward her own challenges and interactions, leaving her vulnerable to the possibility that she might one day discover too late how deeply the cracks in her marriage had begun to spread. During this time, Brooke Lynn found herself meeting with Dante Falconeri, who carried his own determination and sense of responsibility toward those he cared about. Dante was relentless in his efforts to provide stability and guidance, and his current mission involved helping both Brooke Lynn and Chase establish a meaningful connection with Giovanni "Gio" Palmieri. This pursuit gave Brooke Lynn an outlet for her energy and concerns, channeling her emotions into something productive while keeping her distracted from the turmoil slowly unraveling in her marriage. As Brooke Lynn focused on Gio, another corner of Port Charles was filled with a very different kind of struggle. Marco Rios emerged as a quiet source of strength for Lucas Jones, who was tormented by the tragic turn in Maxie's health. Marco's presence was steady and grounding, offering comfort in the face of Lucas's despair. For Lucas, the weight of watching Maxie suffer was almost unbearable, and Marco's ability to listen and reassure became a lifeline in those moments when hope seemed most distant. Their conversations were not about solutions but about endurance, about surviving the unbearable uncertainty that surrounded Maxie's condition. Lucas's anguish was compounded by the grim reality of Maxie's prognosis. Despite his best efforts and his medical expertise, Maxie appeared to be slipping deeper into a state from which she might not easily awaken. The possibility of a prolonged coma cast a shadow over every decision Lucas made, forcing him to grapple with questions of long-term care and the future Maxie might face. His love for her made the situation all the more painful, because he could not accept that her story might now be defined by stillness and silence. What Lucas did not yet know, however, was that Maxie's condition may not have been the result of natural causes. Unbeknownst to him, Sidwell could very well have played a sinister role, using something as seemingly harmless as a skincare product to inflict harm. The tainted lotion carried the kind of quiet, insidious danger that left no obvious trace, a weapon designed to escape suspicion. Lucas, consumed by his helplessness, had no reason yet to suspect that someone else was deliberately ensuring Maxie's suffering, and thus his grief was not yet colored by anger or suspicion. Marco, for his part, was equally blind to the darker threads at play. His instinct was to soothe and to support, not to investigate, and his focus remained on helping Lucas cope with the immediate emotional weight of the crisis. For now, neither man saw Sidwell's hand in Maxie's tragedy, but the truth had a way of surfacing in Port Charles, and it was only a matter of time before suspicion shifted toward the one who had the most to gain from silencing her. Until that moment came, both Lucas and Marco remained caught in a haze of grief and uncertainty. Maxie's uncertain future opened the door to troubling possibilities. If her coma proved too prolonged or her condition too fragile for home care, she might need to be transferred to a specialized long-term facility. Such a move, while medically necessary, would place her in an even more vulnerable position. Within the controlled environment of such an institution, she would be at the mercy of those tasked with her care, and if the wrong hands reached for her, she could easily become a victim not just of her illness but of abduction and manipulation. The idea of Maxie being taken against her will, hidden away while still incapacitated, was chilling but not implausible given the motives swirling around her. Sidwell's determination to silence her grew clearer with every step, for Maxie held knowledge that could unravel his deceptions tied to Sonny Corinthos. By ensuring her inability to speak, Sidwell protected himself, securing the opportunity to act with boldness and impunity. The longer Maxie remained silent, the freer he was to expand his schemes, making her suffering not only a personal tragedy but also a calculated strategy in a much larger and more dangerous game. Third, Jack Brennan found himself walking a precarious line as he tried to steady Carly's growing anxiety. Carly's instincts had always been sharp, and she sensed that something about Jocelyn's situation was off. Brennan stepped in, offering calm words and assurances, though beneath the surface he carried the weight of half-truths and unanswered questions. Carly's protectiveness over her daughter made her difficult to reassure, and Brennan knew that if Jocelyn failed to make an appearance soon, the doubts would only intensify. Every moment spent trying to soothe Carly felt like a battle against a tide that refused to be controlled. At the same time, the threat of Jocelyn's fabricated story unraveling loomed large. Joss had crafted a narrative to conceal her true whereabouts and intentions, but the fragile lie was at risk of collapse if Jax entered the picture. Jax, ever perceptive and deeply attuned to his daughter's behavior, would not be easily misled. If he discovered that Joss was not where she had claimed, the fallout could be devastating. Not only for Joss herself but for everyone entangled in the dangerous scheme. Brennan understood that Jax's involvement could turn speculation into confrontation, and that alone kept him on edge. For Brennan, managing both Jocelyn and Vaughn had become a near impossible task. Their determination to push forward with their risky endeavor meant that he had to constantly maneuver between shielding them from danger and controlling the chaos they seemed to attract. At the Five Poppies Resort, where secrecy and danger lingered in equal measure, the situation escalated rapidly. Each step deeper into the resort's mysteries pulled Jocelyn and Vaughn further into peril, forcing Brennan to confront the reality that he could no longer simply contain the problem, he had to find a way to neutralize it before it consumed them all. The resort itself seemed to hum with menace, its opulent facade masking shadows filled with threats. For Jocelyn and Vaughn, the allure of the mission had given way to the realization that they were standing in a storm far greater than they imagined. Brennan could see the danger converging on them, and yet he knew that intervening too aggressively risked exposing their secrets prematurely. The delicate balance between deception and survival was slipping, and soon there would be no room left for careful maneuvering. Jason, meanwhile, was facing his own storm on the other side of the unfolding chaos. Surrounded by danger and uncertainty, he remained anchored by one unshakable decision: he would not abandon Britt Westbourne. His loyalty, though tested time and again, bound him to her safety even when the truth remained shrouded in layers of deception. Jason's presence at the resort was not about control or manipulation, it was about a promise he made to himself to never walk away from someone who needed him, no matter the risks that came with it. Yet Jason's steadfastness carried its own peril. Without knowing the full scope of what was happening around him, his determination to protect Britt left him exposed to traps he could not yet see. The unknown was a weapon in the hands of those who wished him harm, and every move he made carried the possibility of stepping into a carefully laid snare. Still, Jason pushed forward with a kind of grim resolve, driven by his need to shield Britt even if it meant walking into danger blind. As the tension mounted, the paths of Brennan, Jocelyn, Vaughn, and Jason began to intertwine in ways that none of them fully understood. Brennan's attempts to control the chaos were threatened by Jocelyn's unraveling story, while Jason's silent war to protect Britt placed him in direct collision with the unseen forces at play within the resort. The Five Poppies was not just a backdrop but a crucible, pressing each of them toward choices that could not be undone. The danger was not only immediate but also layered with long-term consequences. If Jocelyn's cover was blown, Carly's trust would be shattered, and Jax's involvement could ignite an explosive family rift. Brennan's carefully maintained facade of control would collapse, leaving him vulnerable. And Jason, in his refusal to leave Britt behind, risked becoming ensnared in a battle he could not win alone. Each thread of the story pulled tighter, binding them all together in a web of deception, loyalty, and looming disaster that promised to erupt with devastating force. Finally, back in Port Charles, Drew found himself increasingly cornered as the number of enemies stacking up against him seemed to grow without end. Each decision he made, whether in the pursuit of justice or in defense of those he cared about, left behind ripples that often hardened into grudges. What once looked like a handful of rivals had now expanded into a tangled network of adversaries, each carrying their own motives and waiting for the opportunity to strike. Drew had built his reputation on resilience, but even his strength could not mask the reality that he was surrounded by enemies on nearly all sides. The sense of looming danger only intensified as whispers spread of a darker possibility: someone might eventually pull the trigger on Drew. The atmosphere around Port Charles carried the heavy tension of a mystery waiting to explode, with every character seeming like a potential suspect and every motive adding another layer of intrigue. Drew's life had never been simple, but the thought of an assassin waiting for the right moment shifted the narrative into something much more sinister. It wasn't simply about grudges anymore, it was about survival in a town where alliances could shift as quickly as the tide. At the forefront of Drew's troubles was Ada Justine Turner, whose relentless pursuit of him had grown increasingly personal. Justine carried herself with precision and authority, determined to expose every flaw and misstep in Drew's life. Her campaign against him was more than a professional assignment, it was a mission that fueled her sense of justice, even if it meant blurring the line between the law and personal vendetta. For Drew, her persistence represented a threat he could not easily neutralize, because Justine had the law itself behind her actions. What made Justine's pursuit all the more complicated was the ripple effect it created in the lives of others. Michael stood to benefit from Drew's fall, particularly in the ways that weakened Drew's influence and shifted the balance of power. For Michael, aligning with Justine's efforts, directly or indirectly, offered him a chance to secure his own ambitions without having to get his hands dirty. The irony was that Drew's downfall, orchestrated by an Ada sworn to uphold justice, might ultimately serve the personal gains of those who were closest to him once. Sonny, too, found himself entangled in the storm that Drew's enemies were brewing. While his focus remained on maintaining control and protecting his family, Sonny could not ignore how Justine's actions inadvertently benefited him. Her determination to break Drew's defenses cleared obstacles Sonny himself might have otherwise had to dismantle. That gratitude, however subtle, created a shift in the dynamic between them, a quiet acknowledgement that Justine's pursuit of Drew was, in some ways, serving Sonny's interests. It was within this complicated alliance of circumstance that speculation began to swirl about Sonny and Justine's future. Their paths intersected in ways that went beyond the courtroom, each drawn to the other by equal parts admiration and dangerous curiosity. The possibility of a passionate encounter between them became less of an if, and more of a when, an inevitability simmering beneath the surface of their interactions. For Sonny, the allure lay in Justine's sharpness and fearlessness, qualities he respected even when they clashed. For Justine, the pull came from Sonny's charisma and the power he carried so effortlessly. Every sign pointed toward the eventual culmination of their tension in something far more intimate. The prospect of Sonny and Justine ending up in bed together carried with it consequences that extended well beyond the two of them. Such a connection could create new alliances, spark new rivalries, and further complicate the already unstable balance of power in Port Charles. If they allowed themselves to cross that line, they would be binding their fates in a way that could not easily be undone, regardless of whether it was passion or strategy that drove them there. While this tension brewed, the week promised to be filled with the usual highs and lows that defined life in Port Charles. From August 25th through August 29th, residents could expect the familiar roller coaster of betrayals, reunions, and shocking revelations that kept the town in constant upheaval. Each storyline threaded itself into another, creating a tapestry of drama that reminded everyone that no secret stayed buried for long and no relationship was ever truly safe. For Drew, the week might bring more enemies to light; for Sonny and Justine, it might edge them closer to a dangerous turning point. The unpredictability of these days ahead kept every character on edge. Those loyal to Drew held their breath, wondering if they could shield him from the storm gathering around him. Those aligned with his enemies sharpened their strategies, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Port Charles had always thrived on tension, but now the stakes felt heavier, as though one wrong move could set off a chain reaction that would alter the town forever. For fans watching, the intrigue lay in not only who would fall but also who would rise from the chaos. Would Drew's resilience carry him through the storm, or would the mounting threats finally shatter his defenses?